Thanks everyone for coming. So I'm Dr. Philip Sharp. I'm one of the authors of the book, and there's a slide that explains all of that. So very informal today. Basically, I'll just take you through what's coming up in the Unit 3 and 4 textbook, and there's the Unit 3 and 4 student workbook, and there's a Unit 1 and 2 workbook that's coming out as well. So I guess the first question is, are you ready for the QCAA assessments? Well, who knows, but hopefully we'll explain some of the things that the resources that Oxford has available that will help. So what are we going to do? Brief overview of the syllabus as it relates to Units 3 and 4. What's available in the Chemistry for Queensland series. Now, the Chemistry for Queensland series is the only one of the Oxford books out of physics, psychology, health, everything, that was written entirely from scratch. So that's the reason why you have to forgive us if things are a little bit later than some of the other courses. It's because we've done it all ourselves. Then an overview of the internal assessment and the resources that Oxford has, as particularly the digital ones as well that you might not be totally aware of, and then some time for any questions or comments at the end. So yes, there's 4 of us involved in the Unit 3 and 4 book. One day we might actually be in the same room all together. There's a wide breadth of experience. Crystal is a chemistry teacher. She's been involved in panel for many years. Myself, I'm the coordinator of first year chemistry at the University of Queensland. Yes, as it says, various teaching awards, things like that. But I see the end products of your teaching, and we want your students to do well at school level, but we also want to see them prepared well for university level and for success if they're going on to tertiary study. And hopefully we'll avoid some of those misconceptions about when you boil water, hydrogen gas evolves and you have exploding kettles and things like that. Martin is a teacher at Clayfield. Before he was a teacher, he had a research background in atmospheric chemistry. Kerry Bloomfield has had interstate experience, so she brings a wealth of experience in external exams, which is probably very useful. And Paul Devlin is acting as a reviewer, and I'm also reviewing chapters. So if you find a mistake in the sample chapter about oxidation, I've already spotted that one, but if you see anything else, just let us know. Here are the dates. These are straight off the QCAA website. You've probably seen most of those dates. So 2019, I guess the big one is when finally the mock assessments are revealed. So we have been just as blind as you are as to what the external exams are going to be like. But hopefully we've written the book in a way that really prepares students for a range of exam question styles, and we use all the cognitive verbs that QCAA is going to use. So we've really thought about how we can train students for the external assessment, and there's study tips in that first chapter of the book and things like that as well. So Units 3 and 4, yes, and probably big thing that is worrying you and your students is the external assessment that's coming up midway through term 4. Very different experience for Queensland students. So unit structure, so you're working your way through Unit 1 and 2 at the moment. And coming up, Unit 3 and 4, and I'm guessing that Unit 4, the synthesis, structure, synthesis and design one, is the one that you're more worried about than anything else. You'll see that every syllabus point is covered in the textbook. There are things that we would take out and put in a different order if we could, but we have followed the syllabus. And then you've got the assessment as well there. And yes, Year 11, Year 12. So hopefully on your way in you picked up the copies of the sample chapters. So yes, this is what the new book will look like. Could say something about, climbing up mountains, knowledge crystallizing, something like that. Not quite sure what the cover means, but I think it's visually appealing. So, what we as authors have been trying to do with the book is to support you as teachers and students, and I'm glad I'm not a teacher. We don't have to worry for another year about the new curriculum, because that's when we'll get your students who've come through the national curriculum. But we do realise that this has been and is continuing to be a massive period of change for you. So I feel your pain, even though I don't have to be part of it. But hopefully what you have is a set of resources that's going to enable all students to get through, hopefully enjoy bits of it, and then go on to further success in science. So we've really looked for the best content, and there's a lot of support materials. The practical support materials, for example, have all been road tested by a labbie, so you can be pretty much guaranteed that they're going to work. So the pain points, and I do feel the pain here because I had to write some of the more interesting chapters. Chemical equilibrium, look, it's always a problem for students. They struggle with the concept of equilibrium. Anything that involves titrations, because all of a sudden you've got to think about stoichiometry. They're a bit hazy on moles, litres and moles per litre. I run the titration competition at UQ, and I can tell you, this is people who've decided to enter the titration competition, and probably about 20% of the students are still making mistakes on the calculations for a simple acetic acid HCl titration. So how they're going to cope with a more involved reaction that's not a 1:1 stoichiometry? But for example, there's 2 different titrations there, so you can choose the one that's more appropriate to your class. Oxidation reduction, yes, we see it even at first year level. We taught our second year's electrochemistry for the first time in a while last year, and I think it was 18% average on the electrochemistry. So electrochemistry, difficult at all levels. Hopefully the chapters have quite good diagrams, and that explains a lot of the concepts, I think, there. Chapter 14, I wrote that one, I have to say, and I think if you're going to introduce students to analytical spectroscopic techniques, I would have chosen C13 NMR or simple proton. But the way I've approached that is to give students really simple flow processes that they can flow through. So instead of having that deer in the headlights reaction, oh no, here's my infrared spectrum, it's a forest of peaks, a clear process to follow through, what they should look through first, and give them that guidance. And then chemical synthesis and design. Yes, the molecular manufacturing chapter. So what I've tried to do there is emphasise what is a present reality, and what is just proposal. It's quite exciting, some of the developments and some of the examples in that chapter are probably going to capture the imagination of your students. Just not sure what they might be asked on an exam about that, but all will be revealed when we see that sample assessment. So, it's a bit about what does chemistry in Queensland syllabus offer. It does cover the syllabus. It's been ordered sequentially to help scaffold the learning. And you'll find that the opening page of each chapter, just like the Unit 1 and 2 book, has the syllabus points there on the very front page of each chapter. So the students know exactly what's going to be covered from the syllabus. And that is a big point. I know there was someone made a comment on the Education Queensland Chemistry listserv. Oh gosh, there's a lot in the Oxford book. Yes, there is, because everything is covered. I mean, you have to make the decisions about the timing of that, how you fit everything in, but it is all there for you. There are supports for the assessment. So in terms of the student support, I'm actually the person who wrote the first chapter in the textbooks about the general study tips and where you go to find scientific information about chemistry and things like that. There's also, in the Unit 3 and 4 book, there's a bit of guidance directly on the assessments that they're going to be doing in grade 12. Yes, hopefully the good preparation for the external exam. The student workbooks, that was something that teachers have come back to Oxford and asked about. So Oxford listened and they've done it. I just finished writing the multiple choice and short answer questions for the 1 and 2 workbook just before Easter. I actually ended up finishing them off while camping in a tent. Burley heads. So they are coming, I can promise you. So they have lots of writing activities and again directed at supporting the kind of things that they're going to have to do for their assessment. Practice data tests, cumulative tests and exams are all in the online materials. So you get that with the textbook if you adopt it at your school. And the Science as Human Endeavour spreads, we think, well, they add interest to the book. Yes, we need to get the students interested and exciting, but they're also a good example of the kind of things that students could look at for their research investigation task. You could also look at some of the investigate type questions at the end of the chapter as well for some ideas for that research investigation. Yes, I get truckloads of books sent to me. Most of them end up in a crate on the floor, I have to say. But I do think the Oxford book is just visually appealing. It's very nicely set out. You'll see that they've taken the approach that each chapter has the same structure, and that's been done very deliberately to minimise the cognitive load on students. So they know what's coming, they know where the questions are to be found, the study tips are on the side of the page, they can look in the glossary, things like that. We know students don't read, and they don't read enough. We wish they would read more. But it's also very graphically organised, so it's good for your visual learners as well. Yes, it looks nice, and sometimes that's half the battle. I did get a textbook sent to me. It was for a biological chemistry course, and it was a great textbook. The content was great, but it was only in grey or blue. And I go, this textbook is unusable. No one will look at it. So ended up going with a different textbook. The syllabus practicals are included, and if it's a technique that you haven't used or haven't seen before, there's videos to support you. Things like amino acid paper electrophoresis and things like that. There are editable worksheets, so you can take those worksheets and edit them according to your particular requirements as well. As I said, a lab tech has checked all of those practicals as well, and there's full risk assessments. So your labbies will thank you that they've got something to work off. All the mandatory practicals are in the student book, and the mandatory and recommended practicals are included in the student workbook as worksheets. So student workbooks still coming, but they will have all practicals in them. Right, and there's a lot of things to support you as teachers beyond just the textbook itself. Teaching notes, lesson plans, assessment tasks, and answers to all the questions, which can be useful, and the videos. The spread-based learning, so for certain topics in the textbook, you'll see that there's, say, 2 to 8 pages on a particular topic. So might be calculating pH or something like that. So it's in one clearly marked section as well. And you can assign the online assessment from the O-book to your students as well. The nice thing about Oxford being a international company is they have lots of lots of questions and answers that are online already. The chemistry toolkit chapters, as I said, I wrote those. I hope you like them. I hope your students find some of the things useful. They're meant to be something that they dip into and out of as it's relevant to what they're doing. There's an overview, some step-by-step instructions on how to study this hard thing called chemistry. Some advice that I'm sure they will ignore, like highlighting is not actually very good for learning anything. In chemistry, you actually need to do problems and practice, much more important. And yes, study tips and things like that. That comes out of my much too long experience looking at what students do in first year chemistry. So we teach, as well as our sort of general first year chemistry, we also have the equivalent of a high school chemistry course. And yes, it's very interesting when you have students who you say, well, draw what happens when methanol dissolves in water, and they draw you methyl ions and hydroxide ions. And that's the good students. And then you have carbon ions and hydrogen atoms and oxygen atoms. Interesting. So the student workbooks are coming out. So that's what the textbook looks like. So sample pages are available. I think it's for chapter 6, the redox chapter. Didn't write that one. Don't blame me for that. You've all seen the Unit 1 and 2 book, haven't you? So Unit 3 and 4 has just kept the same structure, which probably helps your students going from one to the other. It should be completely seamless. The case studies, to add interest, sort of provide the hook for students to hang their learning on. So a lot of those are Australian or Queensland examples. For example, in the chapter on green chemistry, I put in a map of Queensland where the biorefineries in Queensland are. So if you happen to be in the right location, you can say, oh, that one's only a couple of kilometres down the road. All the check your learning questions as well. And there's a variety of question types, and I think that's going to be really useful when they come to the external assessment. Yes, probably a lot of them haven't done a great deal of MCQ before, certainly not to the same extent that it's going to be an external assessment. So even just knowing something about exam strategy in terms of how to approach multiple choice questions when the right answer is not immediately jumping out at you and things like that. And I think the difficulty of those questions is good. There's a variety there. The worked examples, because we know that often a lot of the problems in chemistry are actually problems with grade 9 and 10 algebra, and we've really worked hard at encouraging them, particularly where there's calculations. Show your working, cancel your units, ask yourself at the end, does my answer make sense? Yes, we even see the students had an experiment where they had to work out the amount of sugar in cornflakes, and they dutifully do the calculations. Yes, the cornflakes are 200% sugar. Think about that answer. Does it make sense? So we've even put in some of those worked examples, check your answer. Does this make sense? The challenge questions, if you have your super bright students, they're extension questions. So if there's, you have that super bright student who's bugging you, I want to do more, I want to know more about this, point them towards those challenge questions. The study tips, they're all things that, as people have been teaching chemistry for a while, we know these are the critical things that students need to get and that they often get wrong. So they're there. If the students take note of them, they'll hopefully avoid some of the common pitfalls. Right, so the student workbooks are coming, but we'll tell you the dates when they'll be available, and they'll be available electronically well before the print as well. So yes, there are samples that you got there. The toolkit again, chapter checklists, so your students as they're reviewing, they can undertake metacognition, think about the learning for themselves, start getting them used to be independent learners. The data drill, things about helping them to modify their experiment for their experimental work, investigation, research review, practice exam style questions, which were all written new, internal assessments, prac manual, and there are answers as well. So this is what the student workbook looks for, the chapter 6, the redox reactions. So that there's a checklist there for them to fill in. What do they feel confident about? What do they need to still work on? Data drills, so interpret a graph, something like that, answer the question, and then some conceptual type questions as well with nice images to scaffold their learning. The practical manual, okay, so there's cautions, so they know the major things to be thinking about as they're doing the prac. There's a slight quick intro to safety in the lab, but obviously you want to go through your own laboratory rules with them. Worksheets that they can write in, and as I said, the workbook includes all practicals, both mandatory and suggested. And then there's some scaffolding as well about, here's a stimulus about ocean acidification. Right. And this, I think, is where I hand over to talk about how you get access and things like that.